Donald Trump is the worst criminal in human history.
No, you're wrong.
At least, that's what Noam Chomsky, an American professor and political activist, thinks. However, Trump is not a dictator. Yet. But these 10 people were some of the most brutal, crazy, and obsessed tyrants in history. One of them literally ate his enemies. The list isn't just based on death count, also considered a methods of murder, treatment of opposition, and general fear within and outside the country. Starting with Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea. Kim never liked Japan. He was born in 1912 to a family of peasants fleeing the Japanese rule of Korea. At age 17, while a student in Manchuria, he joined a communist youth organization, which led to him being arrested and jailed for a few months. Upon Kim's release from prison, he joined the Korean guerrilla resistance against the Japanese occupation. Kim's distaste for the Japanese and love for Marx was noticed by the Soviet Union, which invited him for special military and political training. He could not say no, literally. After the Japanese surrender in 1945, following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Korea was divided into two parts. The South, supported by the US, and the North, supported by the Soviets. Kim was sent to oversee the northern part, with hopes to reunify the country. Spoiler alert, he failed. Miserably. In June of 1950, Kim launched an invasion of South Korea. The war took the lives of more than 2.5 million people, more than the entire population of Slovenia. After 3 years of bloodshed and no progress, Kim was forced to sign an armistice agreement. North Korea was devastated by the war. Poverty, famines, and civil unrest raged through the country. But Kim was not about to give up. First, he collectivized all the farms and built state-owned factories producing weapons and heavy machinery. Second, he eliminated all political opponents and sent any critic to a prison camp. All information and misinformation came from the state. Anyone committing thought crime would see their entire families disappear. Kim died of a heart attack in 1994, but his Orwellian regime stayed. Now his grandson, Kim Jong-un, is the supreme leader of North Korea. The country's economy and infrastructure continue to suffer from fascist and isolationist policies. However, one thing has changed: nuclear weapons. The future remains uncertain for Koreans and the rest of the world. But while Kim Il-sung was brutal, at least he didn't eat his enemies. Idi Amin was born in Uganda around 1923. Deserted by his father, he was raised by his mother, an herbalist and fortune teller. With no formal education, he joined the British and later the Ugandan army. 6 feet 4 inches tall, charismatic and skilled, he had all the traits of an inspiring leader. He even became Uganda's light heavyweight boxing champion and gained the highest rank possible for a black African serving in the British Army. However, what made him notorious were his extremely violent military interrogations. With Uganda approaching its independence in 1962, Amin formed a lucrative alliance with the country's president Milton Obote. Together, they smuggled gold, coffee, and ivory out of Congo. However, conflict soon arose, and in 1971, Amin staged a successful military coup, becoming the new president. Amin gained decent support from the public after freeing several political prisoners. However, the support quickly turned into fear when he began sending killer squads to eliminate his opposition. What's more, his enemy list started to include journalists, lawyers, homosexuals, students, and senior bureaucrats. In 1972, he expelled all Asians from Uganda, thus crippling the country's economy. Once a charismatic young boxer, now the Butcher of Uganda. During his reign, close to 500,000 people, around 5% of the country's population, were killed. But his methods of murder were something out of a Stephen King novel. Popular legend claims that Amin was involved in blood rituals and cannibalism. While there is no proof, he often insisted on being left alone with his victims and boasted about eating human flesh. However, it was his huge ego that led to his demise. In 1978, Amin attempted to annex Kagera, the northern province of Tanzania. This ended in disaster, with Tanzania capturing the Ugandan capital of Kampala. Amin fled to Libya, later Saudi Arabia, and remained in exile for the rest of his life. Despite his atrocious crimes against humanity, Amin was never prosecuted. He died from kidney failure while in sanctuary in Saudi Arabia. While the next dictator didn't eat his enemies, he was no less evil. Saddam Hussein was born in northern Iraq in 1937 to a family of peasants. As his father disappeared and his mother suffered from depression, he was sent to live with his uncle in Baghdad. At age 18, he tried joining military school but failed the entrance exam, which left him devastated. A few years later, he joined the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party and was involved in an unsuccessful attempt to assassinate the Iraqi Prime Minister. Saddam spent several years in prison but managed to escape, becoming the new leader of the party. In July of 1979, the president of Iraq was forced to resign, which allowed Saddam to take his place. He began his reign by suppressing internal dissenters and forming a cult of personality. Saddam had a dream to become the leader of the Arab world. This led to his unsuccessful invasion of Iran in 1980, which lasted a whopping 8 years. In the closing days of the war, he launched a brutal chemical attack against the Kurdish people in Iraq, killing 5,000 and injuring 10,000 more. The survivors of the massacre still suffer the after effects, not to mention the psychological trauma. The images speak for themselves. In 1990, Saddam attempted to take over Kuwait, but failed miserably due to the United States joining the opposition. The US government suspected Saddam of working with Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda organization and developing weapons of mass destruction. President George W. Bush named Iraq as part of the Axis of Evil, along with Iran and North Korea. Saddam's dream of becoming the king of the Arab world came crashing down on March 19, 2003, when the United States attacked Iraq. The dictator, however, escaped once again. On December 13th, he was found hiding near Tikrit and subsequently brought to trial. On November 5, 2006, Saddam was found guilty and sentenced to death. Despite his request to be shot, he was hanged in an Iraqi base in Baghdad. Yet little to no proof has been found of any covert weapons program or Saddam's involvement with Al-Qaeda. Saddam is estimated to have killed around 500,000 people, including thousands of his own. While everyone knows about Saddam Hussein, most people are not familiar with the next dictator. But they should be. Hideki Tojo was born in 1884 in Tokyo, Japan, to a former samurai family. His father, Hidenori Tojo, was a lieutenant general in the Imperial Japanese Army. Hideki's education heavily focused on military training, with most Japanese boys hoping to fight for the honor of the emperor. In 1902, he graduated from the Japanese Military Academy and continued to work his way up in the Imperial Japanese Army. Hideki was known to be a stubborn and competitive child. He had a distaste for lazy people and took pride in his strong work ethic. In 1922, he visited the United States and was shocked by what he saw. A bunch of soft, materialistic people devoted only to making money and to hedonistic pursuits. Hideki's reign of terror began in October of 1941, when he became the prime minister. While Hideki hated the West, his treatment of the Chinese was akin to Hitler's treatment of Jews. From 1935 to 1945, close to 300,000 Chinese were slaughtered as part of human experimentation and biological weapons manufacturing. Hideki was a supporter of eugenics and sterilizing people he deemed to be mentally unfit. What's more, he consented to the forced prostitution of so-called comfort girls at the hands of the Japanese military. Hideki resigned as prime minister on July 18, 1944. After Japan's formal surrender in 1945, Hideki shot himself in a suicide attempt but was miraculously nursed back to health. He was then tried for his war crimes and sentenced to death. Despite looking like a charming uncle, Hideki will be remembered as one of the most evil men in human history. But what happens when the dictator is both vicious and incompetent? Pol Pot was born in 1925 to a farming family in central Cambodia. At age 6, he was sent to live with his elder brother, where he studied the French curriculum. However, he failed the entrance exams for high school and instead studied carpentry for a year. In 1949, he went to Paris on a scholarship to study radio electronics. He soon became involved with the French Communist Party and joined a group of young left-wing Cambodian nationalists. Preoccupied with revolutionary activities, he failed his studies and was sent back to Cambodia. Upon his return, Pol Pot spent 12 years building up the Communist Party and served as its secretary. Afraid he would be arrested, Pol Pot fled into the jungle. There, he formed an armed resistance movement, Khmer Rouge, meaning Red Cambodians, and waged a guerrilla war against the sitting government. After the Civil War, which included heavy US bombings aimed at preventing communist leaders from taking over Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge army took over Cambodia with Pol Pot as their leader. and in the spring of 1975, Cambodia entered into one of the most brutal regimes in human history. China's Cultural Revolution under Mao Zedong heavily impressed Pol Pot, which explains his forcing people into a rural farming life. The Khmer Rouge executed anyone who represented the old society, including intellectuals, merchants, Buddhist monks, former government officials, and former soldiers. What's more, Pol Pot targeted many ethnic minorities. He killed 90,000 Muslims, as well as half of the Chinese in Cambodia. Vietnamese were either expelled or murdered. Forced labor, starvation, disease, torture, and execution were commonplace. Money was outlawed, together with property, religion, and most books. Marriages were arranged, and children were separated from their parents. Pol Pot's devilish regime lasted 4 years and took the lives of nearly 2 million Cambodians, a whopping 25% of the country's population. In 1979, following the Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia, Pol Pot fled into the jungle once more. In 1997, he was finally arrested and tried. Trial verdict: house arrest. Here's Pol Pot in a 1997 interview at his house. "I came to carry out the struggle, not to kill people. Even now, and you can look at me. Am I a savage person? My conscience is clear." What if there was a dictator even more brutal than Pol Pot, one that historians have been trying to hide for decades? King Leopold II was born in 1835 in Brussels, Belgium. As his older brother died a year before his birth, Leopold was heir to the throne the second he entered the world. At age 9, he got the title of Duke of Brabant and was appointed a sub-lieutenant in the army. His public career began in 1855 when he became a member of the Belgian Senate. Over the next 10 years, Leopold traveled abroad extensively, visiting India, China, Egypt, and the countries of the Mediterranean coast of Africa. However, everything changed when his father died on December 10, 1865. A week later, Leopold took the oath and, at 30 years old, became the new King of Belgium. On February 5, 1885, King Leopold II established the Congo Free State. What made Leopold different from other European colonists was that he wasn't really a colonist. Instead of colonizing the land, he simply declared it his own. And what's more, Leopold presented himself as a philanthropist. The good Samaritan that he was, Leopold was determined to bring the benefits of Christianity, Western civilization, and commerce to African natives. He began his humanitarian mission by forcing the Congo people to labor for valued resources including rubber and ivory. Meanwhile, malnutrition, disease, and torture took the lives of half of the Congo population. Some natives were killed, while some had their hands or feet, or both, amputated. Under the king's direction, multiple rebellions were brutally put down. An estimated 15 million people perished during his barbaric reign, making Leopold one of the deadliest dictators in history. As the realities and suffering within the Congo Free State became more public, many European people started speaking out. A great many demonstrations, protests, and international pressure forced the king to downgrade the Congo Free State into a colony of Belgium. On December 17, 1909, King Leopold II died. Despite his generous philanthropy, his funeral cortege was booed by the Belgian crowd. Interestingly, it had nothing to do with his atrocities in Africa. Rather, people didn't like his demeaning of Belgium's small size, his inability to speak proper Dutch, his luxurious quarters, his many mistresses, and his fondness for teenage girls. Unfortunately, King Leopold II barely entered the history books. Chances are this was the first time you even heard of King Leopold or the Congo genocide. However, it's almost impossible you haven't heard of the next dictator, Joseph Stalin. Born on December 18, 1879, into a dysfunctional family in a poor village in Georgia, Stalin did not have a nice childhood. Frail from an early age, he was savagely beaten by his alcoholic father, a struggling cobbler. To make matters worse, the other village children were just as cruel, instilling in him a sense of inferiority. Two early events scarred him for life. At age 7, Stalin contracted smallpox, which left lifelong facial scars. A few years later, he was severely injured in a carriage accident, leaving his left arm permanently deformed. Beaten, bullied, and betrayed by God, Stalin set out on a mission for greatness and respect, looking to punish anyone who crossed him. In 1888, Stalin's mother, a devout Russian Orthodox Christian, enrolled him in a church school in hopes of him becoming a priest. There, he began reading Karl Marx and joined a secret socialist organization. He left the school in 1899. Some say he was expelled for his revolutionary activities, while others claim it was his ill health and inability to pay the tuition fee that made him quit. In 1901, he joined the Social Democratic Labour Party and began his rise to power. A year later, he was arrested for coordinating a labor strike and subsequently exiled to Siberia. Although he escaped from exile, he was marked by the secret police and had to work in hiding. In 1907, he was associated with the massive Tiflis bank robbery, which resulted in several deaths and 250,000 stolen rubles, around 3.4 million in US dollars. But everything changed with the Russian Revolution in February of 1917. Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin denounced the sitting government. He encouraged people to rise up and seize land from the rich and factories from the industrialists. Soon, the Bolsheviks were in control and the throne was up for grabs. In 1922, Stalin was appointed the secretary of the Communist Party. Lenin's death in 1924 allowed Stalin the opportunity to destroy the old party leadership. Unlike some other dictators, Stalin's appearance wasn't particularly frightening. At just 5 feet and 5 inches tall, Stalin was a relatively small, unassuming figure. However, what he lacked in height, he made up for in unimaginable brutality. As any smart dictator, Stalin began his reign by eliminating his opposition, including Lenin's successor, Leon Trotsky. Anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activities was arrested, exiled, or murdered. As Stalin's opposition weakened, his power increased. So did his cruelty. Stalin, a loyal admirer of Marx, thought that collectivism would accelerate food production and thereby force 25 million rural households to amalgamate in collective or state farms. Although the peasants did not enjoy losing their land, they had no choice. Any resistance meant a one-way ticket to hell, also known as the Gulag. Stalin was intent on modernizing the Soviet Union at any cost and began rapid industrialization. The country quickly saw huge increases in coal, oil, and steel productivity. However, not all factory workers were able to meet his high demands. Those who didn't were scapegoated as saboteurs, imprisoned, or executed as enemies of the state. Crash collectivization caused unprecedented famines. An especially deadly one, known as the Holodomor, struck Ukraine. The starving of Ukrainians wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate attempt to tamp down Ukrainian nationalism that resulted in at least 3.9 million deaths. While aimed at crushing any aspirations for autonomy, Stalin's evil policies only boosted the Ukrainian spirit. The blood of more than 20 million people is on Joseph Stalin's hands, making him one of the most ruthless dictators of all time. On March 1st, 1953, Stalin suffered a major stroke and, over the next few days, died a slow, agonizing death. While some take comfort in Stalin's painful and much-deserved end, up to 70% of Russians today approve of Stalin's role in their country's history. However, the next dictator has no such sympathy, and in many people's eyes is the embodiment of evil. Adolf Hitler. Born in 1889 in Austria, he was the fourth of 6 children. From an early age, he was mercilessly beaten by his father and ridiculed for his interest in fine arts. Hitler dreamed of becoming an artist, but was rejected twice from Vienna's Academy of Fine Arts. As a struggling artist, he lived a lonely and isolated life. Failing to achieve anything in Vienna, Hitler moved to Munich in 1913. He was screened for Austrian military service, but was classified as unfit because of poor physical vigor. However, when World War I broke out, he petitioned the last king of Bavaria, Louis III, to be allowed to serve. The next day, he was invited to join the 16th Reserve Infantry Regiment. Hitler served throughout the war and was awarded the Iron Cross for his bravery. An outcast in his regular life, Hitler found military experience greatly fulfilling. After Germany's defeat, Hitler joined the small workers' party in Munich, Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, Nazi for short. Resentment ran rampant. People were furious about the failing economy, the loss of territory, and the humiliation caused by the Allied powers. Blame needed to be put on someone, and Hitler had the answer. As the party's chairman, Hitler denounced communism and capitalism as international conspiracies to destroy Germany. Who created these conspiracies? Those who benefited from them the most. Jews, of course. While anti-Semitism was present in Germany prior to Hitler, the Nazi party resurfaced fear, anger, and bigotry, some of the best tools to control a nation. Hitler soon gained notoriety for his captivating speeches at bars such as Hofbrauhaus. However, the speech that changed everything happened on November 8, 1923, when Hitler stormed a public meeting featuring Bavarian Prime Minister Gustav Kahr. Hitler announced his national revolution and declared the formation of a new government. The coup, however, ended shortly, with Hitler being arrested and sentenced to 9 months in prison. While in prison, he published the infamous Mein Kampf, which sold more than 5 million copies. Filled with anti-Semitism and nationalism, the book advocated for a society based on race, the Aryan race. Upon his release from prison, Hitler joined the race for the presidency. Although he lost to 84-year-old Paul von Hindenburg, Hitler got 36% of the vote, showing the people's growing interest in extremist ideologies. A year later, Hindenburg appointed Hitler as chancellor. In 1933, the parliament building was set on fire, which Hitler used to convince the government to grant him emergency powers. Sadly, his plan worked. Hitler's reign began by eliminating any opposition with a series of assassinations. But what makes Hitler arguably the most evil dictator in history is his treatment of Jews. Following through on his party's promises, he excluded all Jews from society, depriving them of German citizenship and boycotting their businesses. Soon, Nazis started destroying synagogues and vandalizing Jewish homes, schools, and businesses. The persecution reached its peak during World War II when Hitler enacted the genocide known as the Holocaust. Some 6 million Jews, around 2/3 of the Jewish population in Europe, perished. Jews, as well as Poles, communists, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and trade unionists were sent to concentration camps. There, they would be used as forced labor, starved, tortured, experimented on, and executed in the most brutal fashion. During the last years of the war, Hitler retreated to a bunker. With Soviet armies approaching Berlin from 2 directions, he shot himself. Adolf Hitler will not be remembered as an artist or a war hero. Instead, he will enter the textbooks as the man who started the deadliest war in history, executed millions of innocent people, and forever ended the toothbrush mustache. The next dictator, however, was a climate change hero who wiped out 11% of the world's population. Genghis Khan. Born in north-central Mongolia around 1162, Genghis was destined to be a leader. Legend claims he was born with a blood clot in his fist, a sign he would become a great warrior. However, his childhood was anything but easy. At age 9, his father was poisoned by his rivals and died. The clan also expelled the father's 2 widows and their 7 children, leaving them to die. The family survived by eating roots, rodents, and fish. One day, after Genghis had caught a fish, his half-brother snatched it from his hands. Without hesitation, Genghis drew his bow and established himself as the new head of the family. At age 16, he married his intended wife Borje, cementing the alliance with the conqueror tribe. However, she was soon kidnapped by a rival tribe and given to the chieftain as a wife. Genghis was able to rescue Borje, asserting himself as a great leader with exceptional fighting prowess. At age 20, he joined his brothers and several other clansmen to form a fighting unit. Genghis' army grew steadily, reaching a whopping 80,000 by 1206. He dreamed of destroying traditional divisions and uniting the Mongols. Genghis defeated a great many tribes over the years, including the Tatar, who had murdered his father. He ordered the killing of every Tatar male who was taller than 3 feet, around the height of a baseball bat. Later, he conquered the Tai-Chi-Ut tribe by boiling its chiefs alive. Thanks to Genghis' unmatched military tactics, the Mongols quickly became the most advanced army on the planet. He employed extensive spy networks, which allowed him to adopt new technologies from his enemies. The army had a sophisticated signaling system of smoke and burning torches. Each soldier was equipped with a bow, arrows, a shield, a dagger, and a lasso. But what made Mongols particularly dangerous was their ability to control horses using only their legs while they shot arrows and marched into battle. Following his countless victories, at age 27, Genghis was declared Khan, the ruler of the Mongols. In 1204, Mongolia was unified, but Genghis wasn't satisfied. He wanted everything. After uniting the tribes, Genghis was in control of more than 1 million people. There are two ways a dictator can guarantee the support of his people. One is to scare the people into obedience by beating, murdering, and exiling any dissenters. The other is to create policies that increase economic growth together with living standards. Genghis chose the latter approach. He banned the enslavement of any Mongol and stopped the selling and kidnapping of women. He made livestock theft punishable by death and offered protection to any merchant traveling across his empire. Legend says that a man could walk from one end of the Mongol Empire to the other with a golden plate on his head and never be attacked. What's more, religious tolerance was encouraged and any discrimination based on race, ethnicity, or class was frowned upon. However, his enemies did not get any love from Genghis, as the Muslim Empire of Khwarezm would agree. Many things could be said about Genghis Khan, but he did care about his people. When he found out that the Khwarezm Sultan had massacred a caravan of Mongol traders, war was unstoppable. Although outnumbered, the Mongols overrun the Khwarezm Empire, present-day Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and Iran. The brutal invasion took the lives of millions of people, many of whom were women and children. The survivors were enslaved, while the governor was executed by pouring molten silver in his ears and eyes. However, Genghis had justification for his brutality. "I am the punishment of God. If he had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." At their peak, the Mongols had conquered upwards of 12 million square miles, an area about the size of Africa. In 1227, during a military campaign against the Chinese kingdom of Shisha, Genghis Khan died. Before his death, Genghis appointed his son Ogedai Khan as his successor to continue his lifelong dream. 50 years later, the Mongols took over China but fell short of capturing the world. Genghis Khan will be remembered as both a genocidal maniac and the greatest warlord that ever lived. Although his actions were some of the most ruthless in history, he established a diverse and equal society far ahead of its time. But the next dictator killed more people than Stalin, Hitler, and Genghis Khan combined: Mao Zedong. He was born in 1893 in Hunan province of China. Brutally beaten by his father and beloved by his Buddhist mother, he had a yin and yang childhood. Mao did not grow up poor. His father was a landowner and one of the wealthiest farmers in their village. At age 8, he was sent to a primary school where he learned the value systems of Confucianism. However, he had little interest in classical Chinese texts. His education didn't last long, as by age 13 he was working full-time on his family's farm. Bored and restless, Mao left home 4 years later to enroll in a secondary school in a neighboring county. A year into his studies, a revolution broke out against the monarchy. Mao joined the Revolutionary Army and spent 6 months as a soldier in the barracks. In 1912, the Nationalist Party overthrew the monarchy and founded the Republic of China. As Mao's short military service ended, he drifted aimlessly for years from one job to another. Mao's uncertainty reflected the nation's situation at the time. With the introduction of Western learning, young people had to choose between Chinese and Western teachings. However, everything changed in 1920 when Mao read the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. Once a confused and aimless student, now a fully committed Marxist ready to transform China. In 1921, he became an inaugural member of the Chinese Communist Party. 2 years later, the young party entered into an alliance with the Nationalist Party. However, in April of 1927, the new Chinese president, Chiang Kai-shek, broke the alliance and began a violent purge of the communists, which became known as the Shanghai Massacre. Heavily weakened, the Communist Party fled to the mountainous area of Shanxi. There, Mao founded the Soviet Republic of China and soon emerged as the top communist leader. Using his amazing oratory talents, he amassed a small but strong army of guerrilla fighters, thereby becoming a serious threat to the Nationalist Party. However, there was no more time for infighting, as in July of 1937, the Japanese Imperial Army invaded China, eliminating a good chunk of the Nationalist Party. The nationalist leader, Chiang Kai-shek, had no choice but to ask Mao for help. A truce was once again made, with Mao asserting himself as the military leader. After the defeat of Japan in 1945, Mao saw his opportunity to seize control of China, and a bloody civil war ensued. Mao's forces defeated the nationalist government, and on October 1st, 1949, the People's Republic of China was established. Would you believe me if I said that in the next 30 years, as many as 78 million Chinese would die? Radical reforms swept through China, starting with rapid collectivization. 5 million landlords were executed, and their land was redistributed among poor peasants. Mao's campaign to suppress any dissenters took another 800,000 lives. In January of 1958, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward, intended to make China an industrial superpower. The program set up huge agricultural communes but did not anticipate 3 years of floods and bad harvests. An estimated 40 million Chinese starved to death, marking 1959 to 1961 as the deadliest man-made famine in history. In 1966, Mao launched his final purge, the Cultural Revolution. To celebrate it, the 73-year-old Mao did a photo shoot at the Yangtze River, claiming he had swum 9 miles in 65 minutes, setting a new world record. His student supporters, too young to remember the disasters of the Great Leap Forward, got inspired and began to do Mao's dirty work for him. Intellectuals and anyone representing traditional Chinese values were beaten, executed, or sent to re-education camps. The Cultural Revolution erased upwards of 2 million people. However, despite his disregard for human life, Mao also did a few good things, as his supporters are quick to point out. He increased access to healthcare, which massively raised life expectancy. What's more, he promoted the status of women, partly because he was progressive and partly because he wanted more workers in the fields. While Mao's death count is undoubtedly the highest in history, a lot of it can be attributed to incompetence. On September 9, 1976, Mao Zedong died of Parkinson's disease. Mao's legacy, however, is complicated. In China, he's held in very high regard, with approval ratings as high as 85%. The common sentiment being, what he did was bad, but it was worth it. In that case, more than 1 billion people will probably disagree with me, placing him as the worst dictator in human history. While all the men on this list killed millions of people, their justifications and methods of murder vary drastically. Which dictator do you think is the most evil? Perhaps it's someone not on the list, such as Qin Shi Huang, a man who buried thousands of people alive, or Vlad the Impaler, who inserted metal sticks through his victims' genitals. If you've learned something new, please consider subscribing, as it would help me make more Worst in History videos.